He was one of the great American architects of the latter half of the 19th century, and widely praised. He is the very first American to get the Royal Institute of British Architects Gold Medal, or the Queen's Gold Medal as it was known then. He's the very first one. He got a big prize from France, the Legion of Honor and so forth. And yet, in some cases, he was seen, well, he just did these big fancy houses, and that's all he did, and that he was not really around that much. But it is interesting that if you go back and you read the stuff at the time, and on the right, and I hope you can pick out, this is not the best reproduction there, but this is a portrait of him by Louis Sullivan. And Louis Sullivan, I hope some of you know, is one of the great Chicago modern architects, and one of the predecessors of modernism and so forth. And yet Sullivan does this ornament around him and said that he was one of the great figures in American architecture, which shows, I say, this sort of complexity, because the way that we divide things up, there's some people that are old-fashioned, some people that are modern, and that's all there is to it. But Hunt is one of these people that goes in between, but you also have to go back and put him in the context of the time when he was here. And as they say, he was really one of these figures. But even then, if you go back in the context of the time, this is a quote out of this article here on the left by Montgomery Schuyler, who was one of the great architecture writers, critics, and so forth at the time. Mr. Schuyler says that his best work was the earlier, not this later work that was here. And that was sort of one of these controversies, is that he had sold out totally to the wealth and so forth, and was not doing that. Just to note that somebody who knew him very well, whose name is Henry James. Do we all know who Henry James is? He lived here in Newport, and he wrote, well, anyway. But Henry James says that Hunt's best work is probably the very simple charm of the earlier work, and that he complains about buildings like this, or the Breakers, the Marble House, and this is Henry James. White elephants, as one may call them, all cry and no wool, all house and no garden, of distressful inevitable waste. And that was one of the ways in which he was certainly certainly viewed. And here, of course, he is buried here in Island Cemetery. I don't know if you know that, but there's the plaque that is right there. And there's another, this is out of the New York Times right there. But his said there, one of the foremost architects of the United States, is renowned almost worldwide, and just gives us sort of a clue here. And that's one of the things that I find very interesting, because I've been in this game a long time of dealing with American architecture and so forth. And when I started out back in the later 1960s studying American architecture, Hunt was like that. I mean, nobody wanted to pay any attention to him. And of course, what we were all doing was we were looking at modern and that type of thing. But it's just interesting the way that what it is that we are interested in evolves over time. One of the things, though, that says just how much he was admired is that normally when an architect kicks the bucket, they put his name on a building. They might change the name of a building or something like that. But Hunt gets this on Central Park, on Fifth Avenue in Central Park in New York City. This huge monument is put up. And it is, you see, it's a big exedra sort of a thing. There he is in the center. Bruce Price, a very important architect at the time, was the architect of this. Daniel Chester French and others came together to put up the sculpture, but this was a gift of a whole bunch of different people who said that we've got to recognize him of just exactly how important he is. And so what you have in this sculpture here, or in this memorial, is here, as you see, there you have on the left, that is painting and sculpture. She's holding a palette, and she's got a sculptor's tool. And on the right, that's architecture. And if you look closely at what architecture is doing, it's holding that in the hand, and it is the big building at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago at the end of the Court of Honor. And it is sort of interesting just to think about this, but it does say that at the time, the World's Columbian Exposition and the different architects who contributed to buildings around there, McKim, Mead and White, George Post, and so forth. Daniel Chester French did the big sculpture of the Republic. That this was considered to be one of the most important architectural events that had ever taken place in this country. Now, of course, it was only temporary; it was only up for a couple of years, but it just shows the way. It just shows in the way in the way that it was held. Now, it's interesting that this thing here. Why is it placed where it is on Fifth Avenue in Central Park in New York City? Well, it's just a couple blocks down from this right here, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Hunt was the person who put the front on the thing that we all know today. There's an older building that's in the back. Maybe if you've been there, you go inside and you all of a sudden have some red brick and all of this. This is the earlier building. But this becomes really the public face of American art and so forth. And it's Hunt that does this, and this is the elevation. This is the elevation right here. Now there is a little question about who did exactly that elevation. I know that he designed it. I've talked to him about it. But maybe it's his son, Richard Howland Hunt, who did the drawing here, because the sons had moved into the firm as he was getting older, and getting a little weaker. So anyway, what the point is that he was at the the top of the heap in this country as far as architecture, and was widely acknowledged and widely known. Okay, just a little bit of a background. He was born in Vermont. His father was a state senator from up there. And when he passed away, his mother took the family off to Paris. And so what we have there is Mama is in the center. And then directly to her left, the man with the mustache, that's Richard Morris Hunt. And then the man in the back that's leaning over, that is his brother, William Morris Hunt. And I hope that some of you know William Morris Hunt was an incredibly important American painter. He studied in France and helped to bring some of the French traditions back here to this country. And that's a self-portrait there of William Morris Hunt on the right. And that's the rest of the family. But what is interesting is that Mama Hunt took the whole family off to Europe because she was scared about the education that they would get in this country, and so that they could really get a good education abroad. Now, just to put in just a couple more William Morris Hunt paintings and so forth. I think he's a little bit forgotten today, but he was really an incredibly important person at the time, and as I say, really helped to bring some of the French traditions, back here. When Hunt was in Paris, he studied art. They moved around. They went down to Switzerland for a while. He did some sculpture, and that's a little piece of sculpture that is up there. There is an exhibit that is up over Rosecliff, isn't there now? I haven't seen it. It opens tomorrow, I think, afternoon. And so if you come, I'll be there to look at. But this is a drawing that he did down here. And this, you don't really think of this as a drawing by Hunt, but this sort of medieval castellated thing. On the right, this is a drawing, and I should say that all of these drawings, at his death, they were given to the American Institute of Architects, the AIA in Washington, D.C. He was the founder of the AIA. Now they've been given to the Library of Congress. At the Library of Congress, all of his drawings are from there. And I'm sorry, some of these drawings you can see, I took pictures of these years and years and years ago. But here he is comparing different orders, different columns and so forth, all in scale. And that shows just how obsessive he is and so forth. You know, we always think of columns, well, they're all sort of a standard, but no. And this shows the sort of things that he was picking up. So anyway, what happens is that he goes to the École des Beaux-Arts, the School of Fine Arts in Paris. which did teach sculpture and painting as well as architecture. I think today most of us think of it as the so-called Beaux-Arts style, which, excuse me, is a bunch of baloney and so forth. But he did go there, and this is a view down here in the lower left, the Palace of Studies. You can see the Premier Court. This is the front of the building right there by Felix Dubin. But this is a big complex of buildings located where? On the left bank. I mean, that's where the hot stuff happens and so forth in Paris. And this is where he went to school. This is where he went to school and studied. And it's interesting just to wander around there, as I have over the years, and just to look at this. Here's the Palace of Studies. And this is an inset in the end of it, way down here, and this same wing sticks out. And look at that, what you have there. And these are some fragments. You can see there's some classical fragments that are put there. And of course, the point is that this is where you learn. And this is how you take these things and you put these together. Here's a couple of pictures. Mine a number of years ago when I was fooling around over there, but this is the big center of it. And this is where you went to school. And just imagine that you wandered through all of these are plaster casts and so forth, but of ancient Greek and Roman sculptures. And then the corner of the Pantheon, the Parthenon, excuse me, is there. And that this is the way that you were taught. And in other words, this was the ancient stuff and what it is that you should look at. We don't have a picture of Hunt there, but there were the way that you were taught there is you joined a studio or an atelier, and there was a very well-known architect to be running that atelier, and you would do projects there, and then you would turn them in. And this is a photograph on the left, about 1885, of Atelier Lalou. And Mr. Lalou became very popular with Americans, and supposedly in this photograph, I haven't talked to everybody that's in it, but supposedly about at least half of them are Americans that are studying over there. And so, but Hunt's the first, and then there's others that come along slowly, but it really grows on. The other thing is, I put this in on the right just to point out that there were good times that were there. And if you are part of any architecture school today, we always have a Beaux-Arts ball every year, which is a sort of anyway, a type of a thing that goes on. But that's what there were good times that you learned when you were the École Beaux-Arts. And just a couple of other things that you did these projects under your atelier master, who was normally a rather well-known architect, and then you would hand them in, and then there would be a big jury that would be held and decide whether you did well or you did not. Hunt entered 50 competitions, and he only placed in 8 of them. So. Now, was that because he was an American or what? I don't know. I've gone back. The other thing, though, that is interesting that at the École Beaux-Arts was that a man who taught there for just a couple of years while Hunt was there was a man by the name of Eugène Emmanuel Viollet-le-Duc. And Viollet-le-Duc was a very important French architect slant theorist who published a couple of different books, such as this one here, Entrée sur l'architecture. And Viollet-le-Duc was very interested in modern stuff and modern construction. And so as you can see, what's holding together this corner there are big iron columns that are holding the thing together. And so he was a key figure, and that Hunt met him while he was in Paris, and I think that some of this had some sort of an influence on him. And so here are some of the things that Viollet-le-Duc would be teaching and so forth. And it would go all the way from a sort of an ancient column into the medieval and into the flying buttresses and how you held together cathedrals, and then to modern construction over here on the left. And so we tend to think of the École Beaux-Arts sort of very old-fashioned. that they were just taught traditional, but they did not really, that there were lots of other things that were going on there, and of course what you wanted to do is you wanted to come out and be pretty good. Here are a couple of Hunt's drawings while he was at the École des Beaux-Arts. Again, these are in the Library of Congress today, and I'm sorry the color's a little gone on these, but this is the way you learned architecture. You studied the details that are coming out of the books, or some of the fragments and so forth that were around, and then you did these very, very detailed drawings like this for Ionic, and on the right a cornice from a Corinthian order. He also did projects, and these are a couple of the drawings of his that survive. This is a railroad station, a little railroad station. And just to point out that the École des Beaux-Arts wasn't all just old-fashioned stuff, that you had to learn the modern things. And so this is a railroad station, two sides to the thing. The track is coming down behind it, and coming down behind it on either side. There it is right there. There's a section, as you see, that goes through. At the same time, you also learn more traditional, like like monuments in this. Now, we could have a little bit of a context of who is this monument to? What do those things look like? Well, okay, I'm not going to tell you, but it can be. You can see different things. You can see different things that are going on. One of the last projects that he did there, and this is in 1851, and of course what was going on in 1851 over in London? The Crystal Palace, the big World's Fair, the first of the world's fairs was in London, and this was his project here. This is for a conservatory, but it's rather interesting the way that this is this glassed sort of a thing. That there is certainly a reflection of the most current avant-garde sorts of ideas that are going on over there in Paris, and that he's picking them up. And there is a section through it, as you can see there on the right, and then this on the left is unique and very unusual. They did not teach you how to do perspective drawings at the École des Beaux-Arts. They were all elevations, plans, and so forth, and yet this is in his collection, or in his drawings and so forth, they say at the Library of Congress, and it's rather unusual, and I think does say a little bit something about what he was what he was trying to do. Other things that are there, and these are projects that he entered, and I mean, as you moved along, this is a big library on the left. On the right, this was a project for Napoleon I that was to be put at the head of the Ile de Cité, the big island that is there in the middle of the river, and that is Napoleon, as you can see up there. So he's learning at different levels, from railroad stations up to the grandest and so forth, up to the grandest and all of this. The other thing is that just to note that while he was there, the big expansion was going on in the Louvre, and that he did take some courses from Hector Lafeuille, and that these are the Louvre expansions, this huge Second Empire, what we call Second Empire, sort of a thing that's going on. So he was getting he did travel in Europe and so forth, and he was beginning to pick up these things. Well, and anyway, he comes back to this country in 1857, and he goes to work for a man by the name of Thomas U. Walter. Walter was the architect of the United States Capitol. And this is when, you can figure out what that is on the left there, that's the dome of the United States Capitol. And there's always been some question about who exactly designed that damn dome. Now, I can't say that I know for certain and so forth, but certainly that Hunt has a hand in the expansions. And the United States Capitol, if you knew, was a much smaller building, and then they add on the big wings for the House of Representatives, for the Senate, and put up this gigantic dome, the biggest dome in the world at the time and so forth, that this is part of it. But the other things that he does, and he comes back, and on there on the right, this is a scheme for a historical society in New York City. It was never built, but it's just like that Louvre expansion we just saw a minute ago there with the big mansard roofs, mansard roofs and all of that. Some other things, though, that happen is that he builds on the right the 10th Street Studio Building in New York City. Unfortunately, no longer there. But this is the first purpose-built artist studio building in this country. And the idea was that different artists and so forth, and Frederick Church, Thomas Cole, and a number of different people had their studios in here. And this is where Hunt had his office for a number of years, was in the building on the right. But what if you look carefully at this, and you see the way that this is being handled here, and look at these sort of round things down here, and it doesn't exist any longer, but sort of abstract. And then this, of course, is the Chateau sur Mer here. And what this is called Neo-Greek, New Greek style. And it is, in a certain sense, it's sort of a modernized, you might say, Greek architecture, Greek architecture that he brings back. Now, in that studio building, the 10th Street Studio Building, it came down in 1926, I think. Well, don't quote me on that, but I think it's 1926. He ran a studio, but he also took in students, young men, to study to be architects. And so here are 4 of them that were his students there at the time. Frank Furness, who becomes very important down in Philadelphia. George Post, very, very important in New York. William Ware and Henry Van Brunt are both Boston and New York architects, and they were really sort of central figures. It is interesting, they worked for Hunt, and one of the things that comes off of some of the memoirs is that Hunt really knew how to swear. He could cuss imaginably. I'm not going to try and imitate him here, but he was really well known for that. And anyway, Frank Furness remembers that one day in the office, a contractor came in, and this is Furness's memoir of this. Some contractor or other had vexed me, but what I considered his stupidity. I cut loose at him for about 1 steady minute, full of cussing. The sliding doors were quickly pushed apart, and Mr. Hunt's face appeared in the opening and said, "Good heavens, Furness, the pupil has surpassed the master in at least one way." And anyway, but this gives a clue to this. But these were really very, very important, very, very important people. And they designed buildings that are like this here, such as right there. This is at Harvard by Ware and Van Brunt. That's Frank Furness. That's the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts down in Philadelphia. That they go on to major careers in their own. Another thing that happens is that Hunt brings back these books by Leduc, the major French theorist and architect, and one of Hunt's students, Henry Van Brunt, translates the thing and publishes it over here, and so it becomes available to Americans. And so this is some of the ways that these things happen. George Post, this very important New York architect, he did Cornelius Vanderbilt's house there in New York City on the right, and his students really do take off. The other thing that is important is, and this is always critical to any architect, you've got to marry well. You've got to marry money. That really helps you out because that puts you into society and to the money flowing in. And so here, this is the wedding ceremony, but this, of course, they're playing around here. They're playing around with this here. But that's Hunt in the center. With his bride to his right, to our left. But as you can see, everybody's having a good time there, all dressed up in costume and all of this. Hunt does also do some projects that never came into fruition, such as on the right, this proposed gateway to Central Park. He's doing lots of stuff, and I say if there are a couple of books that are done in Hunt. The best one's probably Paul Baker, but there's a couple of others, a couple of exhibits that have been done, and then there's the exhibit that's opening here. The drawings show a lot of different things that were never built. One of his most important first works is this here, and of course this is the Newport Art Museum, but he gets this commission very much through his wife, that she's the connection with this. It has been added to and so forth, but it's a very interesting sort of it's a very interesting sort of thing. Now, what is the style of this? Tudor? Well, many years ago, one of the great American art historians, architectural historians, Vincent Scully, St. Vincent Scully, who taught at Yale, said that he's the guy that invented the shingle style term and the stick style, and that this was the stick style, that this was an original American invention that Hunt was doing here. It's a reaction to all of this damn wood that we have around, and all of this, all this wood and all of this sort of stuff that we have around. However, and Scully does make a claim that there is a connection between, say, A.J. Downing, who did a couple of books on American architecture, country residences, and the architecture of country residence, the architecture, country houses, and this is a house in wood there. And Scully made the claim that where Hunt is doing this, as you see there on the left, that this comes right out of this American type of tradition. Baloney. Because if you go over to just outside of Paris, there is a suburb, La Vézenay, that was built in the 1840s and 1850s. I'm just showing you one house there. I could show you about 30 different houses. But you can see these are all this wood type of membrification. And secondly, and this is a drawing in the collection at the École des Beaux-Arts. I don't have Hunt's drawing for this, but at the École des Beaux-Arts, you had classes. There was in stonework and woodwork, in iron and so forth. But in the woodwork, as you can see here, and that's what this is a wood type of a project that was done about 1852, just about the same time he was there. So what I'm suggesting is that what we see there at the Griswold House and so forth is really something that he is importing from Europe. It isn't really an American sort of a thing, though we've come to accept this thing as American. The other thing, though, that is interesting, I know the plan's upside down, but I'm trying to put it in connection with that elevation that we have there, as you can see, that while it does look irregular on the exterior, the plan is very heavily organized there, and it's a sort of a symmetrical type of thing with a hall that goes through there, and all of this, and the staircase. And so there is this variety that's in the exterior, but on the interior, you have, on the exterior, you have all of this variety and so forth that some people would say is Tudor, though Tudor doesn't become popular about 20 years later, something like that. But this sort of stick style is really very much a French invention that is brought back here, and then that we make it, of course, on our own. And just a couple pictures in case you haven't been in. This is extremely French. This gigantic staircase there for Mrs. Griswold to parade down to the party that would be down below and so forth. And this is really one of these most magnificent things. And this is one of the things that Hunt does very well, is he knows how to do staircases. And you can imagine the people that are parading up and down it. There is a variety of works of Hunt that are around, and I'm just showing you these here, but these are some Newport works that he did. On the top, the chateau, which is sort of out on Ocean Drive, that's been added to and so forth, but it's really a sort of a French chateau with a lot of additions put on it. The house in the bottom is very much in 1870s. He did do this drawing on the right, this log cabin. It is labeled on the back Newport, Rhode Island. but where it was built, I don't know, and have never been able to find it. If anybody knows where it is, but I think it's long gone. But the point is that what the Hunt really gets going here, that Newport helps to make him, and that he does a whole variety of works that are scattered around town. Many of them have been altered and so forth over the years, but this is over in the sort of the artsy section, but and has been altered. But he really gets into doing some major works. And what is interesting about these is the variety. This isn't what we think of Hunt, right? This isn't the Breakers. This isn't Marblehouse. This is Hunt. This is Hunt very much early on. Yeah, excuse me. This is over in the Catherine Street area. Here's another one here, the Charles Shields house, and you can get some of the. It's once again has been altered, and there's been additions that have been put on it. His love of the variety of materials, a variety of textures, and so forth as you get into this. But at the same time, what you're beginning to see there is maybe a somewhat pulling together, maybe a little bit pulling together in it, though you still have the porte cochere on the right in my photograph there on the right. That's an addition that's been put out. Elsewhere, he was an ardent abolitionist, and he got this very important commission for originally the Freedmen's Institute, then renamed the Hampton Institute down in Hampton, Virginia. And this is for the free African American slaves and so forth. And this is the first one of the higher education institutions done in this country. And there is this sketch here on the left, not by him, but that was originally, somebody came up with that as what they were going to put there. But then Hunt gets the commission, and that's the building he puts up. And it's a gigantic sort of a thing. And once again, just shows the way that he's spreading out, that he's getting out there different places. It isn't just Newport and houses that he is doing this. Here's a couple of details of it. And very interesting. I think the brickwork that's been done around the entrance there, and these the way that you have this sort of setbacks and so forth, but the variety. We're up there in the gables. There you can see up there in the gables this type of thing here. So he is a man that is exploring. Other things that he does no longer exists. He came down, I think, in 1909, 1910, but this was for a time the tallest building in New York City. And this is a skyscraper. This is one of the original. Now, don't say that too loud, because out in Chicago, they like to claim that we invented the skyscraper out here. But this is much taller than any building that's gone up in Chicago at the time. And once again, shows the variety of interest in him. And the way that, I mean, it's sort of interesting, that is asymmetrical, as you can see. That the tower's a little bit off center there, and the window placement on the left-hand side is a little bit different on the right, and so that he is exploring different things. There was a little competition that was held to put up the monument down at Yorktown for the end of the Revolutionary War, and Hunt enters this and wins it with the help of two of his buddies, Henry Van Brunt, who was an architect who studied under him, and then John Quincy Adams Ward, who was a sculptor. And so this is the Victory Monument down in Yorktown. And as you can see, it's a rather interesting thing. This is a watercolor done by Hunt, reputedly, that he came down as the thing was being completed, and he wanted to see it under construction still, and so he put in more of the scaffolding that originally was there to do that. But it's still there, and is one of the, it's not the first, but it's one of the important monuments of the Revolutionary War that we're putting up in those years, as we're discovering, as Americans discovering their history. Other works by him: in New York City, he does this Lenox Library. This was originally on 5th Avenue, almost directly across from where that sculpture of his that I showed a few minutes ago. Then this was ultimately becomes part of the New York Public Library, and they moved down to 42nd Street, and the building unfortunately is torn down. But this is him, as you can see now, much more in a classical type of mode. Maybe this is more neo-Grec, but there is that going on. And then another very, very important project of his is the Statue of Liberty, the base of the Statue of Liberty. And Hunt is a good friend of the individuals that are involved with this. Mr. Bartholdi is the man for the iron, is the sculptor for it. And then Gustav Eiffel, you've all heard of Mr. Eiffel, I think. He is the man who does the iron frame for this. This is a gift from the French to us in honor of the Revolution and so forth. And Hunt gets to do the base for it. And so there is his drawing. And as you can see up in the left-hand corner up there, it says "Return to R.M. Hunt, Architect," and there's a stamp on it. But he's very much involved, and I'd say, in really helping to make American history. That, well, this is one of these things that we think of. Do we really think of Hunt as doing something like this? But no, that damn thing wouldn't be there if Hunt hadn't designed the base. But at the same time, somebody comes knocking. And that's Alva and W.K. Vanderbilt. And they come knocking and say, "Would you do a house for us out on Long Island, in Oakdale, Long Island?" And he does this gigantic, sprawling sort of a thing. It's no longer there. Came down a long time ago. I only wish that I could have gone to it to see the thing, but it's a sprawling, that was right on the water and so forth. But this is where Alva and W.K. would escape from New York City, get out there in the weekends and so forth and doing that. He becomes, of course, the architect of the Vanderbilts. And just a couple of years after it's completed, he does the Vanderbilt tomb, and this is where you have to have the name Vanderbilt. Sorry, ladies, if you don't marry a Vanderbilt, you don't get buried here. But this is the Vanderbilt tomb out in Staten Island. And the reason why it's there is, in case you didn't know, the Vanderbilts ran the ferry that went back and forth between Staten Island and New York, and that's where they began to make their money. But by this time, they've really made their dough. So anyway, that's the first one there. And then, well, okay. Can you do us a house in New York City? And so this is it, 660 Fifth Avenue. It was down around about 41st Street, 42nd Street. It was a gigantic chateau on the avenue. It went up almost overnight. It becomes a tourist landmark. And there are the buses that would go by would slow up and so forth, so you could take a look at it. And there were people just were constantly walking by taking a look at this because there'd never been anything like this. And this is literally what, a French chateau from the countryside that's been picked up and plop right down there in the middle of New York, right down there in the middle of New York City. And there you got the plan of the thing, as you can see, with the first floor, the ground floor, with the big hall that goes through, the big staircases to the right, and then all of your other, all your other spaces, the spaces around it. And here is a little bit what, of course, the interior, a little bit what the interior looked like. It came down many years ago, but this is one of the very first interiors that is done by Allard and Sons of Paris. And Allard and Sons were the premier interior decorators, interior decorators, and manufactured for the very elite and so forth. And so anyway, Hunt knows them, and he's able to convince them to come over and to do this and to bring over some antique paneling and so forth. A lot of it's brand new, and to create this sort of magnificent mansion. And this is really, I'd say this may not be one of anybody's most favorite houses, but this is really a groundbreaking house in the shifting of American architecture now away from that sort of variety that he was doing earlier with the Vanderbilts into something that's much more Frenchy in style and much more the much more the French elite. And so, you know, what you do get, and I don't need to explain all of these to you, but I mean, the Golettes, who at one time owned a good portion of the lower Manhattan Island, and this is their joint here, and of course, Marble House by Alva, for Alva and WK. You do wonder when these drawings, when Hunt would bring the drawings to them, in their house and so forth, what Alva had to say about them and so forth, because I think she is involved to some degree. And of course, clients are always involved. But if you just look at these two houses here, I mean, how different can they be? Yeah, they're grand mansions, but one is much more medieval French, and then you have this grand, sort of a classical, grand classical sort of thing. Here are some of the drawings that are also in the collection, and I'm not sure what they have in the show here, but these are some of the drawings from the Hunt archive at the Library of Congress. And then, of course, that brings us to this here, to Belcourt, and what was going on here. And it is interesting that in the drawings and so forth, there is some variety and so forth. You can see that it sort of shifts a little bit over time. And of course, what he chooses here is he chooses a French rural sort of mansion, not a big city type of a mansion, but a rural type of a mansion. And it is a sort of and of course, it's obvious that they liked horses quite a bit and so forth. I mean, can you like horses better than this? Here we are. We're down there in the bottom in the carriage house. That's where we're sitting right there. There's the courtyard there, all of the stables and so forth are over there. Basically, the first floor is really given over to the horses and all of this. And this is sort of an interesting type of thing. And then you go upstairs, and of course you have the grand spaces that are up there. And then the far wall over there is where some of the servants, where some of the servants and so forth were. And what it does show is, I say once again, that I think that we always think of him as being Breakers' Marble House, but there is another side to him, and that he's willing to do and to show different and to do different things. So anyway, what you do see in any one of Hunt's houses is he's poking his head around the corner. And so go upstairs, and you might see him up there. There's a big bust of him, but that isn't original that's been put in up there. But there he is, poking out over the fireplace, looking at you and waving goodbye. Thank you.